Welcome to the International Lawyers Network's webinar series. The ILN is an association of 91 high-quality, full-service, and specialized law firms with over 5,000 lawyers worldwide, of which your firm is a valued member. The network provides clients with easily accessible legal services in 67 countries on 6 continents. Today's webinar, Cross-Selling Made Easy, will provide simple conversational launch points that can help you steer a client interaction into a business development opportunity. Before I pass things over to our speaker, some housekeeping notes. Everyone will remain muted throughout the session, so if you have any questions for David, and he's going to encourage you to ask questions and provide some feedback, please type those into the chat box that you'll see on your screen, and I'll share those with him during the program. We are recording the presentation, so a copy of the recording along with the slides will be sent to you following the webinar. Our speaker today and throughout the series is David Ackert. David is the president of the Ackert Advisory and mentor to high-achieving professionals in the legal profession. He has developed and implemented business development programs for countless firms, from Am Law 100s to local boutiques. Widely recognized as an e-learning pioneer in the legal field, David is the founder of Practice Boomers, a business development e-learning program, and 2-time winner of the Legal Marketing Association's Your Honor Award. He is also the founder of Practice Pipeline, a pipeline management software platform that incorporates business development coaching. The combination of technology and coaching has become a hallmark of his program. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to David for our final webinar of the year.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's a pleasure to be back with you and your ILN members. So a quick apology before we begin, which is that this program is entitled Cross-Selling Made Easy. The fact of the matter is it probably should have been called Cross-Selling Made Slightly Less Impossible, but we just didn't think that that would garner the same attendee group as we have here. So the fact of the matter is that cross-selling is rarely easy, but there are some things that you can do to make it much more palatable at the firm. And ultimately, the framework that I'll be introducing to you today is a very simple one, easy to grasp, easy to implement, but of course it will ultimately come down to your firm's culture and the, let's call it readiness of your partners to cross-sell effectively with one another. But as I say, the framework today is an easy one. I just don't want to mislead you in thinking that you can just sort of plug it in and by sometime the middle of next week you should have cross-selling pretty much completely worked through at your firm. Probably not news for any of you. So the other thing that I wanted to mention to you is as I'm going through the presentation today, and Lindsay mentioned this a moment ago, it really is intended to be interactive because the efficacy of cross-selling from firm to firm really comes down to its culture. And that culture is defined by so many things, whether the firm is a regional firm or a national firm or an international firm, whether the firm is large or small in size, whether the firm is top-heavy or has more of a pyramid structure where there are fewer partners at the top, and of course, coming down to the degree to which the partners have formed relationships that engender a dynamic of trust such that a reasonable cross-selling discussion and follow-through is likely to occur. So I can't predict all of the various nuances that would define your unique cultures. So to the extent that you'd be willing to provide some feedback, some questions, and make this a dialogue, I can provide commentary that I think will be helpful to you. If there's some sensitivity on your part in terms of not wanting to disclose the identity of your firm or yourself as you ask the question, you can just ask it anonymously, just put, anonymous or something like that in parentheses when you type it in to the questions panel, and Lindsay will know not to identify your name and just to say, okay, we have a question and this is the question, and I'll answer it from there. So I think we all know what the advantages of cross-selling are, but just to go through them briefly and kind of ground ourselves in this topic, obviously one of the things that comes with cross-selling is a better understanding of the client. In fact, you can't really cross-sell effectively unless you understand the client's needs. for those of you who have attended any of our prior webinars in this series, you've heard me talk about the importance of understanding where the pain points are prior to trying to pitch something to a client. So, just because you happen to know that your client is big enough that it really ought to have some needs where the tax department is concerned, or it ought to have some needs where the employment department is concerned, doesn't mean that they necessarily have that need currently, or that they'd even be all that open to an introduction at that level. You have to understand where the pain point is so that you can time those introductions appropriately. So obviously, the better you understand your client, the more likely the cross-selling, and so as you cross-sell, you will better understand the client. Those two things go hand in hand. It increases retention. The more points of service you have in the client, the less likely the client is to move on to another firm. It just becomes very difficult for them to do so once you've institutionalized your firm in the client. You'll find that they turn to you for this, and they turn to you for that, and then they turn to you for the other thing, and pretty soon you're the go-to firm for most of their legal needs. So you'll find that if you have at least 5 service lines going into the client is only 10% likely to leave the firm. Those are the statistics. Whereas if you only have 1 service line into the client, the chances of the client leaving your firm go up significantly. Now, of course, if you keep the client happy, they'll never have a reason to leave you, but sometimes it has nothing to do with you. Sometimes they're simply consolidating the number of firms that they're working with. Sometimes it's a matter of rates. Sometimes the kind of matter that you sold into the firm is not something that they need, or they've grown out of, or they're thinking of bringing in-house. So again, it doesn't necessarily have much to do with the level of service that you're providing all the time. Sometimes they'll simply move on from you because of evolution. But the more service lines, the more kinds of legal matters that you are working on, the more likely the client will retain you over time, and it will be difficult for them to stop doing so. Cross-selling is easier than pitching a new prospect. It is 10 times easier to get a new matter from an existing client than it is to get a new matter from a new client. Makes sense, right? I mean, they've already seen the quality of work that you produce. There are some relationships there to leverage. So it's a lot easier to say, hi, you've known us for years. We've been servicing your needs. We'd like to service more of them than it is to say, hi, you've never met us, but we'd like to service a need, or we'd like to service multiple needs. That's a much more difficult conversation and much less likely to be successful. Cross-selling also identifies internal allies at the firm. So it helps you solidify the relationships and the synergies that the firm can provide to its client base. You'll find that you are able to understand what your partners can produce more effectively, and hopefully, if the cross-selling relationship is going well, you have a synergistic win-win where both of you or multiple partners within the firm are much better off working together than any of them would be working as silos. So there's a challenge to cross-selling, and one of the challenges ultimately comes down to how honest we are when we think about cross-selling with our partners or even with ourselves. There's this piece that I'm borrowing here from Fishman Marketing that talks about rhetoric versus translation. Oftentimes when a lawyer is asked about cross-selling, sometimes the rhetoric is, well, they don't need any litigators, so that's why we aren't cross-selling litigation into that client. But what that really means is the lawyer is thinking to themselves, if I send work to the litigation department and they lose, I could lose my client. I'd rather send the case to some other firm than send it to my litigation department just because I don't have that much confidence in my partners. This is one of those ugly truths that does sometimes drive a decision when it comes to cross-selling. If there isn't confidence in the service level of the other partners at the firm, obviously that will get in the way of cross-selling. Another might be that the lawyer would say, well, there are no additional opportunities with that client. That's an assumption that the lawyer is making. It usually is not grounded on a thorough conversation with the client. And again, it has to do with, I don't really trust that my partners will do a good job, so why should I invest the time to go find these opportunities on the client side? The rhetoric might say something like, there are no opportunities with this client outside my practice area. But the translation there is that the lawyer is not particularly well-versed in other practice areas, particularly the practice areas that might be most likely cross-sold in, and they don't want to look stupid in front of the client. This is a reasonable concern, but ultimately one that gets in the way for effective cross-selling initiatives. The lawyer might say, I'm too busy doing client work to cross-sell. I keep meaning to, have the best of intentions, I just can't seem to get out from underwater. And of course, the translation here is that the firm does not reward me well enough to make the effort. I'm being paid for the work that's on my desk, and there's enough work on my desk to keep me happy. The compensation is either not such that I would be incentivized to take my eye off that ball, or, you know, it's sort of a pie eating contest where the winner gets more pie. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of lawyers are simply not incentivized to cross-sell because they have enough work and they're making enough money, and there just isn't a good argument to be made for why they should try to pursue more work. So these are some of the things that can often get in the way of cross-selling. It's just some of the issues. There are obviously others. Trust is a big one too. I don't trust that, and this goes back to this first point, I don't necessarily trust, and many do not even have to do with whether or not the litigation department loses. What if they end up taking my client? What if they end up taking over? The fact of the matter is the client probably has more litigation work right now than they have transactional work, and I'm a transactional lawyer, so if I bring in the litigators, they're going to have all the touch points with my client. They could eventually end up taking over, and yes, I'd get some origination up to a point, but then at some point, someone's going to come into my office and say, hey, listen, I know this client originally came from you, but you know, we've been working on this client for the last 3 years, and you really haven't touched them much, so I think that we should renegotiate the terms under which the originations are split, and you know, that may not be a conversation that the lawyer is willing to have. So these are all the dynamics that often go into inhibiting effective cross-selling at the firm. So this is the framework that I mentioned. It's, as I said, an easy framework. This is cross-selling made easy, at least in theory. The first piece is to identify appropriate client targets for cross-selling. If we don't know what the targets are, then we can't bring solutions to the table, right? Again, to my earlier point, we need to know what the pain points are, and then we can say, oh, well, I can actually help you with that. Let me introduce you to so-and-so at my firm. They're an expert in this or that, and I think they would be able to serve your need well. Then number two, identify appropriate partners within the firm to cross-sell with your clients. This is important. You know, we can't just assume that, oh, well, we have a lawyer over here in ERISA, or we have a partner over there who can handle real estate. So, of course, you would cross-sell them. Well, not necessarily. It has to be a partner who is appropriate, and a lot of that just comes down to the cross-selling lawyer's experience of them. Do I trust them? Do I like them? Do I want to work with them? Do I feel like they're going to have my back if I have theirs? These are the kinds of intangibles that are critical to foster if you want the cross-selling to be effective. And then finally, number three, developing a strategy for the pitch. And I'm not just talking about the pitch where you make the introduction and you do the handoff. I mean, what is the long-term strategy in terms of what we're going to do with the client? And if that's not in place, then the lawyer who is being invited to cross-sell is less likely to do so because he or she is, again, going to have that, yes, but what happens when we go downstream consideration? I mean, I can cross-sell today, maybe I get a little bit of origination off of that, and that's lovely. But if I don't know what's going to happen 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, it really is a short-term benefit that you're dangling in front of me, because the fact of the matter is I've had this client for the last 5 years, and if I just keep my head down, I'll have them for the next 5 if I don't cross-sell them. So, you know, a lot of people would rather just have, you know, one guaranteed dollar in their fist rather than the promise of $5, but they'd have to let go of the dollar in their fist to go for that one. So let's look at number one here, identifying appropriate client targets for cross-selling. Now, some of your firms do this sort of gap analysis. If you don't, I highly recommend that you do. Very simple analysis where you simply look at your top clients and you say, okay, client number one is coming to us for litigation. They're coming to us for real estate, and they're coming to us for M&A. Now, this doesn't answer the question as to whether or not we've captured all of their litigation, real estate, or M&A work. That's a different question, but at least we know we're getting some of it. They do have us in mind as a resource for those 3 practice areas. However, they aren't sending us any tax work. And, you know, they must have some tax work. Now, again, sometimes the rhetoric is, well, if they aren't sending it to us, they simply don't have it. And I would challenge that that's an assumption, and unless you have evidence to that, and they've actually told you that it's just convenient rhetoric. So if they're not sending tax work to the firm and we do that kind of work, then that's an opportunity to have a conversation with the client. And you would go down the list for all of your top clients and identify all of the areas. Now, this firm is capturing a lot of litigation. Maybe it's known for litigation first and foremost. Maybe, you know, the litigation department is just very strong in terms of the ability to find opportunities within a client base. But the litigation department hasn't cross-sold these other departments very effectively. Might be interesting to look at the top, you know, 10 clients and see if this pattern is consistent throughout, in which case it really is beholden on litigation to start to cross-sell more effectively, and it's beholden on real estate, tax, and M&A to begin to form better relationships with litigation because they're not capturing as many of the opportunities as they could here. So this kind of gap analysis is an easy exercise to go through and you know, only takes a few hours of taking a look at the top 10, 20, 30 clients before you identify pretty quickly who needs to be talking to whom on the client side. Now, I want to tell you a quick story that involves Uber. So I do a lot of business travel, as I'm sure many of you do, and I often use Uber to get from place to place when I'm in the various cities that I'm visiting. And I jumped into an Uber a couple of months ago, and I, you know, tend to like to speak with the drivers a little bit and just have a friendly interaction with them. And when I glanced down at my app, I noticed that this Uber driver, whose name was Joe, had 5 stars. I said, Joe, you've got 5 stars. That's like a perfect score. How did you manage that? And Joe said, well, the truth is I've only been driving for a couple of months, so I don't think I've had a lot of reviews. But, you know, so far all the people who I've had the pleasure of driving have been satisfied, and so I have an average of 5. I said, well, that's good for you, Joe. That's great. And then a thought occurred to me. I was like, Joe, you guys rate us too, right? You rate your passengers. You rate your clients, so to speak. And he said, yeah, that's right. And I said, well, what's my score? Can you look on your app and tell me what my score is? And he said, sure. So he taps his app, and he says, oh, David, you're 4.6. 4.6? That's not a great score. And he said, no, it really isn't. Now, you have to understand, I would have assumed that I would be a 5 or maybe a 4.9, right? And I'll give you a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I'm very friendly with the drivers. I always ask their permission if I have to jump onto a call in the back seat. I always tip them in cash after every ride. That's just something that I do. I believe that's important. And so I would think that I would be constantly getting 5-star ratings. But I was down to a 4.6. So I told Joe about all this, and I said, Joe, why do you think this is the case? Do you have any insights? And he said, well, have you ever kept an Uber driver waiting? And I thought for a minute, and I realized, oh, yes, on 2 occasions I did that. Once I called the Uber driver before I was really ready, and then they ended up waiting on the curb for a few minutes before I came out of the hotel. And another time I called the Uber driver when I thought the meeting was ending, and I was just going to rush out the door and jump in, but then the meeting took longer, and they were waiting for a while too. And he said, yeah, you know, that's the kiss of death. Time is money for us. And if you keep us waiting on the curb, we will kill your score. And that was an insight for me. I had no idea. I was going along the assumption that I am a 5 out of 5, maybe a 4.9. It turns out I'm much lower than that. So there's something to be said for gathering feedback. And even though you know that the services that you're delivering are fantastic and that you put a lot of effort into it, and of course you're a premium quality law firm, and you know, no lawyer goes around saying, well, my services are kind of mediocre at the end of the day. But, you know, don't tell my clients that, right? Lawyers all assume that they are 5 out of 5, or maybe a 4.9. But you really don't know until you ask. And the question that you can use to ask is a question that comes from The Ultimate Question by Fred Reichheld. This is a book that came out about 10 years ago. It's been highly influential in the consumer sector, and you often see it on websites, or they'll send you a survey after you use a particular service. The airlines use it. They say, you know, thank you for flying with United. On a scale of 1 to 10, this is the ultimate question, how likely would you be to refer our services to a friend or colleague? It's just one question. You know, and oftentimes we see surveys that ask, you know, 5, 10, 15 questions to try to get a sense of feedback, but really it all comes down to the one ultimate question, because if they answer this question on a scale of 1 to 10, 0 to 6, they're not happy. They are what Fred Reichheld calls a detractor. This is someone who's out there actually saying negative things about you. So when they ask about such and such law firm, the client says, well, you know, they're okay, but I'd look out for this or that. Or, you know, they really are overpriced. Or, well, Mary at that firm is fantastic, but some of the other partners I'm not so sure about. So these are detractors. They're actually hurting your brand. If on a scale of 1 to 10, they say 7 or 8, then they're passive. They're not going to promote you, but they're not going to necessarily throw you under the bus either. They'll continue paying your bills. They may find that, you know, you may find that 1 or 2 of the invoices are a little late in coming back to you, but they will ultimately be bread and butter clients. And if they're a 9 or a 10, they're promoters. These are people who are really excited about the fact that they're working with you. These are the people who are giving you the 4.9 or the 5-star rating in the Uber model. They would be very open to a cross-selling conversation because they've been very happy with the services that they've received so far, and they would be much more likely to entertain a conversation about your delivering more services to them. So one of the ways that you fulfill on this number 1 of the 3 steps that I'm introducing to you is by making sure that you're pitching the right clients. And one of the ways that you do that, besides understanding their business needs and asking them the kinds of questions that help you see just beyond the legal matter that they brought to you, but rather what is their strategic plan, what are some of their business objectives, where are they planning to expand? You know, all of these are going to imply, well, if you're expanding, you're probably going to have some employment needs and maybe some cross-border work, and you're probably going to have some real estate given that plant that you're opening up in this other region. And it sounds like you're developing some new technology, so I should probably connect you to our IP lawyers and our cybersecurity lawyers. So you see, all of these questions lead to opportunities to cross-sell. But you want to make sure that you start with those clients who are your promoters on this scale of 1 to 10. They are the most enthusiastic. And you don't want to just assume that because they've been sending a lot of work your way, that they are obviously promoters. This is not an indicator that you can necessarily tell from revenue. If there was a big litigation, a big piece of litigation that they hired your firm for, and that litigation just happened to blow up in terms of fees, then that might artificially inflate your impression of how happy they are with you if you're just looking at revenue. So don't sort these clients by revenue. Ultimately, you do want to ask them the ultimate question, and you can do that through a survey mechanism that gives you a sense of how happy they are with you. Obviously, if they're giving you an 8 or a 7 or anything lower than that, then there's a conversation to have with them, and it isn't a cross-selling conversation. It is a, hey, what happened here? You know, we want to make sure that we're delivering, you know, the best services to you that are possible for you to get, and it sounds like something happened here that gave us a lower score. Let's have a conversation about what that was and what we can do to fix it. Sometimes it comes down to, well, you know, there was this one period where you guys, you know, you were on vacation and I didn't get the responsiveness I was looking for. Or there might be something like, you know, that those 2 associates you put on the last matter, one of them wasn't that great and the other one just seemed like, you know, they only knew part of what was going on. So in the future, we expect you to allocate different resources to our matters. That's fine. Great feedback. Fantastic. We promise we will. Just the fact that you've addressed it with them, just the fact that you have given them assurances that the next time it will be better, will automatically bump your score up because they feel like they've been heard and they feel like you've taken their interest at heart, that you care. So continuing on number 1 of 3, let's talk a little bit about identifying appropriate client targets for cross-selling. So if you look at the XY here, satisfaction versus saturation, you're going to find that you have a majority of your clients who have a high satisfaction level with you. So again, on a scale of 1 to 10, they're rating you 8s, 9s, and 10s. And that the saturation level in terms of the number of services that they are coming to you for is also high. These two things correlate, which is, again, why we are asking that question first before we cross-sell, because those two things go hand in hand. You'll also have some clients who have a relatively low satisfaction level with you, also a low saturation level, but they use you. Why? Because they don't know anybody better, or there's that one partner who they've known for years, and it's just kind of a relationship thing at this point. But, you know, they probably think they could do better, and that's why they're sending most of their other services to other firms. You may have 1 or 2 clients where the satisfaction level is low and the saturation level is high. I promise you they are shopping and they won't be around for long. And then you're going to have a few clients where the satisfaction level is high, but the saturation level is low. These are the ones that you target for cross-selling. Again, this goes back to that gap analysis where you notice that you know, there are opportunities for us to cross-sell. And if you look at the difference between which areas have we not yet cross-sold into the firm, which your gap analysis will tell you, and you look at your survey results, which tell you that the satisfaction level on these clients are high, now you have your cross-selling targets. You've compared those 2 data points, and you have your sweet spot, your short list, the people that you want to go after. High satisfaction, low saturation. So now we discover their business needs. We research the client in the news. We ask the client about their 5-year strategic plan, inquire about any new initiatives, products, or services in development, find out if there are plans to open any new offices, plants, or factories, and ask about their current legal outsourcing situation. In other words, where are they sending the work and how much of it is going to other firms? The end parenthesis on that one is invisible, obviously. So these are important questions to ask because they invariably lead to some sort of need that they have either currently or downstream, and you can pair your cross-selling introductions accordingly. These interviews, I believe, are best done in person. It's tough to get somebody's attention, even on the phone, where you're asking them a series of questions like this. So I would say, you know, do it over a bottle of wine, do it over a meal, and do it where everybody can relax and they can, you know, really see that you are doing this not just because you want to cross-sell more legal services, but rather that you're looking out for them. You want to make sure that their needs are met, and if there's anything that you can do to meet those needs, then obviously you'd be delighted to assist in that regard. All right, let's move to step 2. Now we're looking to identify appropriate partners within the firm to cross-sell with your clients. So we've gone through step 1. We figured out who are the clients who have the need and who are so satisfied with our services that it would be an easy ask. We've asked them some business questions so that we identified the specific legal need that we can cross-sell. Now we need to match that to the partners within the firm. So obviously the most important piece that precedes this is trust. Partners need to trust one another, that they're going to be able to work together, that they're going to be able to share their clients. You have to consider, I mean, you all know this, but it bears repeating, that the clients are the lifeblood of the lawyer. It's one of the most precious things to them. They've worked so hard to develop this client base. They've worked so hard to keep the clients happy. Not always an easy job. And so for someone to come along and say, hey, well, why don't you share some of that? You know, it's sort of like saying, you know, you're not using both of those kidneys, are you? Maybe I could have one of those. So you have to make sure that there has been an investment in building trust among the partners. And sometimes this is a firm-wide initiative. If your firm is smaller, then it's something you may have to take on yourself. But you build trust by investing in informal social time. So, you know, this is not just, oh, let's grab a bite together over lunch in the middle of the day. This is also dinners. This is over a glass of wine. This is our families are going to meet one another. This is firm retreats that allow plenty of time to have shared meaningful experiences. And, you know, firms know to invest in this, but you'll find that if the trust just isn't there, part of what you can do to address that is to advocate for more informal social time between the lawyers. Also, if you find that you're a lawyer at a firm, a partner who just isn't being brought in to the other partner's clients, you're having a hard time being included on pitches or on cross-selling initiatives, you need perhaps to show more deference and respect to those lawyers. Consider that, you know, this is a bit of a delicate balance at the firm. Partners need to not only show that they are winners, that they are confident, that they are competent, and, you know, various other sort of alpha qualities, but they also have to show deference and respect to their partners. And sometimes that's hard. It's hard to do both at once. But consider if you simply aren't being invited into these conversations, that it's an opportunity for you to assure the other lawyers through action, not just words, that you are respectful, because that will also imply that you'll be respectful of the relationships that they introduce you to, especially these very precious client relationships. And you want to establish a precedence of trust. And one of the ways you do that is by being the first person to trust. So trust them with something that is precious to you first. So that might be a client of yours that you cross-sell, or it might be at least an introduction to a referral source who you found to be particularly helpful. Or it might be something more internally driven, like helping them with their responsibilities on a particular committee at the firm. But the idea here is that you need to demonstrate to them, just because you're partners, at most law firms, that is just a title. It does not imply a relationship. So you need to build that relationship by helping them understand that you really are somebody who has the right qualities for that kind of a trusting relationship, and a lot of that's going to come down to you making the first move rather than sitting around waiting for them to make it and being upset that they don't. Another way to think about this is that the first cross-sell is internal. You first have to motivate the relationship partner to integrate you into their client base. And they have these questions in the back of their minds that need to be answered. What long-term value will you add to me? I'm not going to bring you into my clients unless I know that you're going to bring long-term value to me personally. How do I know that cross-selling you is worth the risk of introducing you to my client? This is a question that they harbor in the background. How do I know that your work product will consistently make me look good? Consistently. Because if it's inconsistent, then I'm just not going to bother doing this. And how do I know you won't try to turn this into your client down the street, down the road? So these are the kinds of questions that are there in the background. How you address them is up to you, but don't just assume that, well, they should know better, we're partners, or, well, hopefully by now I've demonstrated that, you know, I would never do that. No, everybody's been burned at a law firm. So, you know, a lot of this is, again, bearing in mind that you're dealing with somebody who's probably been scarred before, probably been betrayed before, and probably harboring these concerns, puts the onus on you, if they're the relationship partner and you would like to get involved with their clients, to address these concerns through the course of your relationship with them. And obviously that's going to come down to the dynamics, the interpersonal dynamics that you have together. So I can't really address those specifically, but it would be like any other relationship, whether it's a personal relationship or a professional one, where you know that they harbor some concern, and it's up to you to address that concern either overtly or covertly, however you think is going to be most effective. A couple other things to consider as you're identifying the appropriate partners to cross-sell into your clients. Willingness. You want to avoid lawyers who are overprotective of their client relationships. So as you're looking to bring other partners into your client base, you want to avoid those who tend to be overprotective. They aren't going to be particularly effective when it comes to the quid pro quo. And it speaks to a kind of relationship with the client that does not bode well for the future of your cross-selling relationship. Also, confidence. Make sure you have confidence in their abilities and professionalism. I think we've touched on this enough at this point. Knowledge. Your partner must understand what you do such that they can cross-sell your services effectively. And in some cases, that requires you sitting down with them and helping to distill in just a sentence or two what it is that you do so that the next time they spot an opportunity in their client base, they can speak intelligently about what you do. A lot of times, you don't want to just assume that, well, they're a competent, articulate lawyer. Surely they can capture, at least at a high level, what it is that I do. Sometimes they can. Sometimes they're only 90% sure. And most lawyers, if they're only 90% sure, that's not going to be enough to take a big risk on it. So give them some of those trigger questions that they can ask their clients, or some of those elevator speeches that you have designed, and know that they have not put the time in to create an elevator speech for you, right? That is not on their agenda most of the time. It's up to you to arm them with that. And then finally, follow through. Choose a partner who fulfills their commitments so that your joint efforts bear fruit. Everyone has the best of intentions when it comes to cross-selling. Everyone would like to be more involved and to share origination. All that stuff sounds good on paper, but at the end of the day, if they have not demonstrated that their follow-through is there, if they're always that lawyer who says, oh, I'm sorry, I just got too busy. Oh, I'm sorry, I just got too busy. At some point, they've branded themselves as someone who just isn't going to be able to follow through on any commitment other than fulfilling their billable requirements. So now we get to developing a strategy for the pitch. This is step 3 in our 3-part framework. You've identified the clients that you want to cross-sell to. You've identified the partners who are on your short list of resources within the firm. Hopefully there's a match between those two. Oh, I need a great tax partner because I've identified a client that has a tax need. Sure enough, here we go. I've put 1 and 2 together. Now number 3. So the 2 of you are going to want to sit down, schedule a meeting to review client targets. You're going to look at, okay, here's the client that I'm bringing to the table. Do you have any clients that you would also bring to the table because we want to have a cross-selling conversation here? And it would be helpful for that earlier point about building trust if we both brought something to the table rather than me just bringing you in. Although, you know, it doesn't always work out that way, but it's a good way to set a precedent as to establish that there will be some back and forth in this relationship. It's not going to work if it's consistently just a one-way street. Now, I will say sometimes you have lawyers that you cross-sell to simply because they're great resources, right? They make you look good. They do good work. They're never going to bring you into their clients. Sometimes they don't even have clients, and that's okay. You know, that basically you're going to keep all, if not most of the origination on that, and they're just going to work on your clients. That's a different kind of relationship here. I would argue that's not even really a cross-sell. That's just a delegation, even though it may be happening from partner to partner. Then you're discussing the unique challenges that face these clients. So again, this is about helping them understand the business of this client and the particular tax need or whatever it is that you've identified, and deciding on the best strategy for each pitch. So it might be, okay, now that we understand what the issues are, how do you think we should do this pitch? Is this just a straight up introduction? Is there a joint seminar, a CPD or a CLE or some sort of educational program that we can put together for the client so they can really see you in action, because I think that would be even better. So you'll figure out exactly how to approach the client. And sometimes the client will have given you that feedback when you had those initial business queries with them as part of number 1 of the 3-step process. Again, this is a cross-sell, so both parties need to know that they're going to play some part. Right? You can't have a one-way street in this. It just isn't sustainable. It is a great way to build your book of business. So again, whether you are the lawyer who is offering your clients to another in the hopes of building that bridge, or you're the lawyer who is going to a relationship partner in the hopes that you'll be included in an upcoming cross-selling conversation, take responsibility for this process. The one thing that consistently does not work is waiting for someone to get around to making the first move. As I stated in my opening remarks, there are just so many barriers, cultural and otherwise, to cross-selling at the law firm that unless the partners are proactive about it and really treat it from a perspective of building relationship, developing strategy, and following through and implementing, looking at a long-term 5-year horizon, then there are too many reasons why it just isn't going to happen. So you've scheduled your meeting with your partner, you've come up with a good strategy, you're going to bring a CLE seminar to your clients, that you do so, they love it. Afterwards, you get a drink and you introduce your partner to all of the relevant people on the client side. Everything seems to go really well. Now you want to schedule your next cross-selling meeting with that partner. Again, you want to keep the momentum going on this because they have clients that they're working on, presumably, and so do you. And if you just wait for lightning to strike and for the client to say, oh, by the way, do you have another, do you have a matter for a tax partner, and then you bring that person back in, you're not being particularly proactive. But if you schedule a meeting, once you have those key partners in the firm that you really do trust and you really feel are good allies for cross-selling, then I would be proactive about it. I'd say, okay, once every other month or once a quarter, you and I should sit down, we bring our client list, and we just brainstorm our way through them. I promise you're going to find at least one or two opportunities in there where you're going to say, wait a minute, I haven't even asked them if they have any tax needs, right? You haven't even asked them if they have any employment needs. Let's go ahead and do that. Here's how I would navigate that conversation. Let me know if you'd like me to be a part of that meeting. So these are the kinds of proactive conversations that need to happen if you're going to maximize the potential that you have among those partners who you trust at the firm. Don't wait for lightning to strike. You meet again to explore additional targets. You revisit the targets who were not ready for the cross-sell when you last discussed them. They may be ready now. Now, this bears mentioning simply because we are in ILN here, that while cross-selling as a concept is certainly effective within your own firm, it's also effective among other firms as well. So if these techniques are resonating for you, or if there's some component here that you want to pull out and run with, then I encourage you to think about where within the ILN network or within your professional network you can also apply this three-step process. For instance, you may either find that it's something that works with another law firm. You may even find that it works with the commercial banker who works across the street from you. Tell them to bring their top 5 clients, and you can have a brainstorming conversation with them about, oh, well, have you had a conversation with them about M&A? Are any of them doing roll-up strategies? We can help there. Do you know if any of them are growing aggressively? Are any of them in technology? Because we have partners that we can introduce there. And again, the back and forth dialogue is relatively similar here, even if you're talking to somebody who is not in the legal profession or is not at your firm. So I included this. I know that Lindsay will be sending out this PowerPoint deck, but I thought this would be a useful checklist. This comes from Altman Weil. It's an action planning worksheet. And what you want to do is just answer these questions for yourself, like write down the answers, and you'll find that it starts to create an action plan for you. The first question, what internal obstacles to cross-selling do I need to address, and how? Note, it does not say what internal obstacles to cross-selling are there at my firm. There could be a long list, but that's not helpful. That's just more complaining about the status quo. How are you going to address them? And in some cases, you may say some of them cannot be addressed. That's fine. But really, there's got to be a few that can be addressed if you truly apply yourself. You spend all day solving other people's problems. Here's an opportunity to solve some for yourself. Who are my best client targets for cross-selling, for both giving opportunities to others in the firm and receiving opportunities to me? As we talked about, this can be a two-way street. You want to be thinking about it both in terms of how can you share your clients to benefit yourself more in the firm, and how can you get integrated into someone else's book of business. Number 3, how can I make it easier for the relationship lawyer to convince their clients that they need to meet with me? Remember, you want to put yourself in their shoes. Don't assume that just because you've demonstrated competence and capabilities and you managed to get on this or that rankings list that that should do the job. You want to tailor your pitch to the need. Number 4, how will I solicit feedback from these clients? We talked a little bit already about the Fred Reichheld ultimate question. That may be one way to do it. There may be others that your firm has already institutionalized, but this is an important question to ask, because when there's positive feedback, it gives you ammunition to be able to build on that momentum. It also helps identify who the clients are that would be most likely to be receptive to a cross-sell conversation. Number 5, what value adds can I use to get client meetings? And how should I maximize our effectiveness during those meetings? The value adds are always key. If you're not already providing services to that client from your practice, then you have to demonstrate to them that your services are going to be of interest to them. So sometimes distributing an article, a white paper, we talked about a seminar, can really pique interest and sharpen their appetite for having more conversations with you. It also arms your partner with something to go to the client with, right? You'd never want to arm your partner with a request. Well, Charlie, just ask your client to meet with me. Well, that doesn't benefit Charlie, and now he's basically pulling in a favor from his client. So that's not as effective as saying, Charlie, I happen to look and see, based on our conversations and based on the news today, that your client is facing this or that there's a new regulation that they should be made aware of. I actually just wrote an article on that, or I just wrote a blog post on that this morning by way of preparation for this conversation. Would you mind forwarding that to them? Not only will it make you look good because it puts a need that they clearly have front and center, shows that you've been mindful of some of their concerns, and it also provides an opening for us to have an introduction down the road. Number 6, how can I stay top of mind with my cross-serving targets over time? Cross-serving, cross-selling, same concept. How can I stay top of mind over time? Again, we talked about regular calendaring every other month, every quarter, something like that. That's one way to do it, but it's a great question to ask yourself. You may have a different answer to that question. I highly urge you, if you are taking this topic of cross-selling seriously, to take this worksheet and go through the trouble of jotting down a few thoughts for these 6 questions. It'll only take you 15 minutes, and it will help to begin to give you some shape to a plan on how you individually are going to apply some of these concepts, some of these questions to your circumstances. Again, no cookie-cutter advice that I can give you on a webinar is going to resonate top to bottom. There'll be a piece that you like here, a piece that you like there. Ultimately, these are the pieces that you have to construct for your unique plan. And that takes us to the conclusion. I think we've talked about all the various takeaways here. There's in the deck that Lindsay will be distributing to you, there's some additional reading. This is cross-selling, working together to get more work from existing clients. There's a great article from David Freeman, who's a fellow business development consultant to law firms. I highly encourage you to click on that link, check it out. It's a great article that can also provide some useful information to you. So with that, we have about 10 minutes left. Lindsay, I'm going to open it up for questions. Again, this is one of those very personal challenges. It's personal from firm to firm. It's personal from lawyer to lawyer. It's personal from situation to situation. So if any of you have specific questions or challenges pertaining to cross-selling that you'd like to share at this point, I'd be more than happy to address them.
Yeah, I do have one question, and I will leave the chat open so that anybody can post their questions as well. And I think you covered this a little bit, and I think probably most of the people listening to the webinar are already pretty self-motivated just by the nature of the topic. But what if you are the one who's struggling with follow-through? What are some tips that you would have for staying motivated throughout this process?
So just so that I understand the question, I believe what's being asked is, you're a lawyer at a firm, you know that you should be cross-selling, you just can't seem to get yourself to do it. Is that your understanding of it, Lindsay, too?
Right. I think you're saying that when you're choosing cross-selling partners, it's obviously you want to choose people that are motivated and will have the follow-through. But what if you're the person that has trouble with the follow-through?
All right, that's a great question because it shows a level of self-awareness that, you know, is not all that common among us human beings. You know, I would say one of two things. If you can break cross-selling down into highly achievable baby steps and extend your timeline, then do that. Make it a very reasonable activity for yourself. So it might be something like, all right, well, David had these 3 steps. Here, let me go back to that real quick. Number 1, identify appropriate client targets for cross-selling. Okay, yeah, I'm going to give myself 4 months to do that. I know it's a gap analysis. I know all I have to do is just print out my clients, and I have to, you know, take a look and see what various service lines are being sold into those clients. And really, it's only a 15-minute exercise. But I'm going to give myself 4 months to do it because I'm having a hard time following through on it. And and what that means is I'm probably going to procrastinate. I'm probably going to have some excuses, and that's okay, right? I mean, there's no point in beating ourselves up about where we are with something psychologically. All there is to do is just work with the facts that are on the table. So if that's one of the facts on the table, then I would push the deadline out. Know that you probably aren't going to be cross-selling anytime within the next year or two, but by a couple of years from now, you will have gotten through these steps, and you'll probably gotten to a point where you're pretty impatient with yourself, and that you'll accelerate your momentum on that. So that's one, is just shifting your expectations. If that's not acceptable to you, then you may want to consider working with someone in a coaching capacity. This can either be somebody internally at the firm who's going to hold you accountable and help produce some of the gap analyses that we talked about, and, you know, meet with you on a regular basis. What I have found over years of coaching is that, all of the best intended lawyers out there will procrastinate on business development for one reason or another until the day before or even the hour before they know they're going to meet with their coach. And then all of a sudden they're very productive. Why? Because we're in a deadline-driven business model, and that's just how we've trained ourselves to operate. So we put off the things that we can put off until we simply can't put them off anymore, and then we force ourselves to do it. So that's why, whenever people say, well, how often do you work with clients when you have coaching engagements with them, I always say we try to meet no less frequently than once a month. Because if it's once every month, every other month, or once a quarter, well, that means they're only going to have that burst of productivity 4 times a year. That's not going to get you anywhere, right? So the more frequently you are able to hold yourself accountable through another party, again, this doesn't have to be an external consultant. It can be somebody internal if you have that resource. It could even be a buddy system if you have somebody at the firm who you trust to hold yourself accountable, and maybe they're working on something similar. You can link up that way. Maybe it's a mentor at the firm who would be willing to work with you on this, but that's another strategy, is putting that accountability structure in place that is predicated on an outside party, someone who is not likely to succumb to your excuses and not likely to let you off the hook. And that will also help to motivate you. So those are the 2 things that I can think of. One is, more a matter of just resetting your own expectations, and the other is asking for some help and being willing to have a productive dialogue on a fairly regular basis with someone who can guide you through the process.
Great. Those are really helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment, but I will provide David's contact details in the email that I send out as follow-up as well, so you can always reach out to him directly if you have any questions or want to speak with him further. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you so much to David for today's presentation and our entire series of webinars this year. As I mentioned earlier, a recording of this session and a PDF of the slides will be circulated in the next day. If you'd like to see any of our previous webinars with David, you can check these out on our YouTube channel by searching ILN today. Thanks to everybody for their participation today. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Lindsay. Always a pleasure.